Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Eli here with the Warriors of the Win YouTube channel. I just want to come out here and say, I'm really sorry it took forever to get this video out. There was a lot of other stuff going on in our personal lives that, we couldn't really put all of our focus on. We had a lot of trial and error, but we finally got there to our first YouTube video. So I hope you guys like it, and thank you so much for joining in. Enjoy the video.
January 4th, Ken woke me up about 7:45 and said he was scared. And I asked why. And I had just had surgery on my knee, so I wasn't supposed to be walking. But I had started walking because I knew my body, and it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Had I not started walking, he wouldn't have woke me up. But I asked him why he was scared, and he said, I dropped my phone and my arm is tingling. And I said, okay. And he said, and then I dropped my socks. And I said, okay. And he said, I was able to pick them back up. And he looked just like Ken. He was able to walk, talk. Nothing looked abnormal. But I knew the symptoms just from my medical background. Ken thought he was having a heart attack. I knew he was having a stroke, but I didn't want to throw him into a panic. So I just said, Ken, we need to go to the ER. On the way there, Ken had told me his face was tingling. When we got there, I went to the security guard and I said, I need to speak to the triage nurse ASAP. And he came out and I said, I think my husband is having a stroke. And I gave him all of the symptoms, and they immediately took him back for a CT angio. They then put me in a room. Eventually, Ken was wheeled in on a gurney, and a doctor came in and confirmed he did have a stroke that was in fact happening. But they thought it was a TIA because he had no loss of strength. He could walk. Everything. He no slurred speech, no facial droop, nothing. He had no fast symptoms, is what they call it. And they said, we have to write it out. We're going to give him aspirin. We're going to give him Plavix. We're going to run blood work. And they did all of that. I said, okay, well, what about a TPA? They said, we will consult with our radiologist and our neuro-IR doctor. And I said, okay. I didn't realize that the neuro-IR doctor was not at that facility, nor the radiologist. But the neuro-IR doctor said that because he didn't have any symptoms, like physical symptoms, it wasn't imperative and it wasn't an emergency. He didn't need the TPA. They thought he was having a TIA. It was going to go away. And then they would continue treatment for a TIA, which is anticoagulants, antiplatelets, whatnot, to continue preventing him from having a stroke. But you can't monitor that on imaging. So they could see this on imaging. And that's where I get a little bit confused as to why they made it sound that way. But they said he wasn't a candidate because his last known normal was 12 hours prior. But the 12 hours prior, he was asleep. And there is a certain way of calling it when you're asleep. There is an unknown time, and because of that, you're a candidate. So I tried to fight for that, and they called the neuro-IR doctor again, and he still said no, it wasn't emergent. The pharmacist came in to go over medications, and she's in there and she's talking to me about it. And I said, can you see him? And she said, I can. And I said, do you see his eyes? And she said, I do. And I said, something's not right. And she said, Miss Klug, he looks fine. And I said, no. And immediately when I said that, his whole face just drooped. And you could just see the whole left side of his body fall. And he was trying to talk and he couldn't talk. It was like he was drunk. He was belligerent. And she called the doctor in. They came in, evaluated him. They called a code stroke. But at that point, within 20, 30 minutes, he was back to baseline. He was kin again. They did all of the neurology testing, he has to follow their finger. He's got to pull, push with his legs, his hands. He succeeded. So, I mean, it was like nothing happened. Those are TIA symptoms. But again, you can't see a TIA on imaging. Can't monitor it. And they could see something there. So they said, we're going to have to admit him, and we're basically just, going to have to see how this goes. And I said, he's still a candidate for the TPA. I don't understand why we're not trying that. And they said it was too risky. They had called the wrong department. I didn't know that at the time. And just recently, in the last week, I went over that specific visit, and it's dictated on there that they'd called the wrong specialist. And so he could have very well been a candidate. Take in mind, we checked in around 9:30. We had sat in the ED for hours. They moved us up to the neurology floor. The neurologist said, we're going to keep him overnight. We're going to continue. They were giving him sodium. All of the, Plavix and the aspirin. We're going to continue giving him fluids, and we'll see how he is in the morning. I said, well, he's in jeans, and if he's staying overnight, I'm staying with him. So I'm going to go home, and I'm going to get some clothes. Went to go home and get him pajamas. I'm on my way back. We live about 25 minutes away from the hospital. And I'm on my way back. I'm about halfway there, and I get a phone call, and it's the doctor. And she says, I don't want to alarm you, but you need to get here fast. He has stroked out. And I didn't understand what that meant, but he had thrown a clot that could have been prevented if he had gotten the medication. So he's there over 12 hours, and he throws a clot. It was about 11:30 at night. And I get there. She tells me I need to make phone calls. He's probably not going to make it. I'm hysterical. And I said, you can't do that. They medevaced him. The care flight men were amazing. Ken begged me not to put him on there. He said, do not let them take me. And I said, why? He said, I don't want to be on the helicopter. I'm a helicopter mechanic. I don't know who worked on it. And I said, I'm sorry, but I'm not sending you via ambulance, so you're going to have to go.
Yeah.
And he was like, he heard them coming in, and he called the helicopter, the name of it. I don't even remember what it was, but he heard the rotors, and he said, no, I'm not getting on it. And I said, yeah, you are. You're going. And I called his sister as his family point of contact. I called my mom, and I said, Mom, will you meet me there? I'm scared. I don't know what to do. And then I videoed the helicopter going up into the air and him leaving. I waited until I knew that they were in the air and safe. Because I wanted my kids to know that if that was Dad's last flight, that he had that last flight. Because the last flight that they knew he came in on was from deployment. And once they went in the air, I hauled ass to Dallas. And I got there and I called the care flight. EMT gave me his cell phone number. He said, call me when you get there and I will come down and get you. And I called him and he said, are you about 20 minutes out? I said, no, I'm standing outside the hospital. And he said, are you at the right one? And I said, are you at Methodist in Dallas? And he said, yes. And I said, I'm here. And he said, wow. He said, you flew. He said, I'm flying down to get you. I said, okay. I went up and I was greeted by their hospitalist who was very pregnant. And she said, I can't do anything until I can get a hold of, at the time, the neuro IR doctor, which was the one that then accepted him to come to Dallas and recommended that he get a thrombectomy. And then remove the clot. She said, and I said, so when is this supposed to happen? And she said, I can't say anything until I can get a hold of him because I can't. I've tried and I'm not getting any phone calls back. We stayed for about 4 hours and I was in and out of the room going, what's going on? You can't, we're wasting time. You told me he didn't qualify for this because of time. He's not going to qualify for anything if you just let him die. And they finally got a hold of him. And he said that it was too risky. He wasn't a candidate. So the next day, another hospitalist came in, Dr. Villamil, and he was very kind. He said, it's maintenance. He's had the stroke. We need to start physical therapy. It's going to be light. We need to start and see if he can swallow. He couldn't. He was on a nectar-thick diet for about 3 weeks. They did swallow studies and what they call fees, where they stick a camera down to see if he's actually swallowing and it's going through his esophagus into his stomach versus his lungs. And they cleared him for a regular diet and said, we're going to send you on to rehab, but you need to follow up with a neurologist. And I said, okay. But while we were there, the doctor that saw him, the neurologist that was there, bedside manner, had none, but extremely brilliant. And I always tell everybody, if you're choosing one over the other, choose the one that's brilliant, that has the shitty bedside manner versus the opposite.
Right.
So I stayed with the course, and he came in one day while we were there at Neuro ICU, and my mom was in there, and I don't remember which one of our children were in there, but it was one of our adult children. And he said, Ms. Klug, I just want to tell you out of the goodness of my heart, your husband had his stroke due to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And it is unfortunate, but I can't put it on paper. He said, it's not going to be anything that anybody can do anything about, except it'll cause my license. He's also a judge. So he knew his legal boundaries and his rights. And I said, well, if that's the goodness of your heart, I don't want to see it. And I said, I don't really appreciate you telling me any of it because it doesn't help my situation, considering I tried to veer Ken away from getting it, and Ken did too. He requested that he not have to get the shot because he worked from home. He wasn't exposed to anybody except me, who worked in the ED. And they said he was still an essential and he was a government contractor. Once his company, Belcan, found out, his boss, I say never forgive, but at some point I'm going to have to for myself. He said he could have opted out. And I said, no, he tried. And I said, and whatever you need to do to remotely wipe his computers, go ahead, because I've already forwarded the emails to my computer. I never heard from that man again. He never called to check on Ken. I've talked to the Human Resources Department. Ken's point of contact was who really wasn't his boss. He didn't work for Sikorsky, he worked for Belcan. And we ended up transferring to Baylor Institute for Rehabilitation. And that was on January 14th. So he was in neuro ICU for 10 days. On January 14th, we transferred, and we were told he would be there for 6 weeks at minimum, depending on the progress. Ken was on Wellbutrin at the time that he had the stroke from the VA. So throughout therapy, he started getting more depressed, which is common with strokes, and they normally treat it. So I said, I think his Wellbutrin needs to be changed. And she said, well, we're going to go ahead and increase it. And I said, no. I said, studies and research show that when you increase Wellbutrin, if it's not working, it only makes it worse. She said, well, we're going to try and increase it. And if it doesn't get better, then we'll change it. Sure enough, it got worse. So they changed it, but they didn't change it until about right before he discharged from there. But while he was there, I lived there and I took care of him because as far as they were concerned, they didn't have to do anything. I showered him, I fed him, I took him to and from his therapies. I stretched him, I did the therapies that they said were recommended, and we just kind of went from there.